Good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Chipman, Mayor of the City of Clarence, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's council meeting for the City of Clarence. Could I ask you to stand for the council prayer, please? Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen. Could I also acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay respects to elders past and present. Thank you. I remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed by YouTube. A copy of the full agenda is available on the Council's website, and a copy of the recommendations for decision will be available via a link within the YouTube stream. I'll declare the meeting open and note that we have an apology from Alderman Pearce. We have a number of starred items which I'll deal with collectively and call for a motion at the conclusion of those. First of all, the confirmation of minutes for the special council meeting on the 26th of August and the council meeting on the 31st of August. Are there any concerns or points to raise there? Item 4, the council notes the workshops conducted on the 7th and 14th of September and the agenda briefing on the 18th of September. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just would like to receive clarification from yourself as to say that the actual matter in relation to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel and Hospitality School is in fact will be scheduled in open council on the 12th of October next. Is that?
That's the planning at this stage, Alderman James, yes.
Thanks.
Item 6, tabling of petitions. General Manager.
There are no petitions to be tabled, Mayor.
Thank you, and none from the floor. Moving on to item 10, reports from outside bodies, reports from single and joint authorities, Copying Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, Alderman Walker.
Nothing to report this time.
Thank you. Tasmanian Water Corporation, there's an owners representative group meeting on Thursday in Launceston, which I'll circulate the results from once I know. And for the Greater Hobart Committee, I'll table the action sheet for the Greater Hobart Mayor's Forum on the 15th of September.
Just a question, Mr Mayor, on Taswater. Is it possible to have an update on when the walking track out at Riston Brook Dam will be again open to the public? It's been shut, well, the gates have been shut now for a number of weeks. And could we see clarification, given that we are one of the owners of Taswater and obviously indirectly have an interest in that particular matter, please?
Certainly, I'll ensure that's in the next weekly briefing report, please, gentlemen. Moving on to item 10.2, reports from council and special committees and other representative bodies. Alderman John? Sorry, Alderman Blom.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'd like to table the minutes of Lindisfarne Community Activity Centre Management Committee of the 17th of September, and also with that the audited financial report as well. And just make particular mention, if I may, Mr Mayor, that it's Angela Cootes is now taking over the management capacity at the centre as of last week.
Thank you. Other reports, Alderman Kennedy?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the report from the meeting of the 9th of September for the Bellarine Community and Arts Centre. They'd also like to pass on their congratulations to all the staff that have been helping them through recent times with a few leaks they've had in the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Child?
Thank you, Mayor. I have tabled the minutes of the Richmond Advisory Committee meeting in August.
Thank you. Other reports? Thank you. Moving on to item 11.1, the weekly briefing reports that the information in the weekly briefing reports for the 31st of August, 7th and 14th of September be noted. Are there any questions in regard to that? Alderman Jones?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The weekly briefing report of the 7th of September 2020, the Bellerive Public Pier, an amendment to the planning permit. My question through you, I think, to the appropriate officer. It mentions here, amongst other things, that the actual, there will be require a minor amendment is now being sought as the planning permit, consistent with the PWE advice. Was this actually part of any contingency plan, in as much as there must have been a timeline, a very strict timeline, in order to have the pier constructed? So even though there has been a minor amendment being proposed, will it be completed on time, and is there any other matter that may obviously cause this development to proceed in the timeline provided, please?
Thank you. General Manager, can you give us some...
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. The timeline for the pier construction was to be completed by the end of August. That has run over schedule, and the minor amendment is related to an extension of time related to the handfish breeding period. At this point in time, we are working with the contractor and the designers to resolve a number of construction issues, and part of that will give us some clarity on estimated completion time, which we're hoping to be later this year. We will be providing an update to Alderman probably in the next fortnight.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? In that case, call for a motion that the recommendations for the start items be agreed. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Second, Alderman Kennedy. No further discussion. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving back to Mayor's communication, I'd like to table significant meetings and attendances for the Mayor and Deputy Mayor over the previous period. 4 minutes. Item 5, declarations of interests of Alderman or Close Associate. I have Alderman Chong for item 11.3.2 and Alderman Blomley for item 13.5. Thank you, Alderman Blomley. Are there any other declarations? Alderman von Berko.
11.3.3 and 11.7.4.
Thank you. Are there any other? Thank you. Moving on to public question time. Item 7.1, I believe there's a public question on notice from Mr Thomas Chick, General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. The question on notice from Mr Chick is as follows. Recent times have seen an uptick in the submission of text-based deputations, which has resulted in their needing to be summarised, if not for time, then for the sake of the General Manager's throat. This has the unfortunate side effect of stripping those deputations of much of their context and all of their tone. In the interest of preserving both and keeping in mind the existing limits, brackets, no more than 5 statements of no more than 3 minutes each, will members of the public be allowed to submit audio-visual deputations while or even after coronavirus restrictions continue to prevent in-person participation? The following answer is provided. During the COVID period, Council has had to operate with new arrangements, including for a period virtual attendance by aldermen at meetings. Public attendance is still not possible due to the size of the chamber. As we are all aware, Council has live-streamed meetings which has been well received. However, Council's current systems do not enable aldermen to electronically participate in a meeting within the chamber. This is because the systems used create a significant feedback loop. The same issue would exist for submitted audio-visual deputations. The only option is a significant upgrade of current systems and IT infrastructure to ensure all systems are completely integrated. With that in mind, I have requested that an investigation of possible upgrades be undertaken, including costs. It is also important to note that it is unclear how long the current arrangements will continue and whether there will be legislative change permitting virtual attendance once COVID restrictions end. With that in mind, any investigation will also need to consider the cost of upgrade against the long-term likelihood of such arrangements continuing as an option.
Thanks, General Manager. Item 7.3, answers to questions previously taken on notice are listed in the agenda, and I propose that we take those as read. Moving on to item 7.4, question without notice. I believe we have one from Mr. Victor Marsh.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a question from Mr. Victor Marsh. His question is in relation to Rosny Hill Road pathway, and the question is, why weren't the light poles obstructing the recently constructed multi-user pathway beside Rosny Hill Road moved before the completion of concreting works? The answer is the light poles obstructing the path are the property of Tas Networks. Tas Networks' timeframe for relocating the poles was impacted by COVID restrictions on their operations. It was determined that the pathway would be installed as planned and the light poles moved later. This approach enabled path users to utilise and enjoy the upgraded pathway without further delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, deputations from members of the public. I believe we have one, General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have one from Samira Hardwick. The submission is in relation to the proposed development at 3 Kalati Road in Rosny. Ms Hardwick's deputation reads as follows. I'm a long-standing tenant of 9 years at 5 Kalati Road, Rosny. The development at 3 Kalati Road, Rosny will directly affect my privacy and sunshine. The long, large window viewed from 3 Kalati's kitchen and living space will look directly down and into my entire backyard, onto my deck where I relax and entertain, and will look directly into my my lounge room, through my lounge room window via their large window. I will lose complete privacy. The owners wish to view the mountain via this window. Although this proposal meets the planning scheme requirements, it does not meet my entitlements. Please, I'm asking you to consider my privacy over the owner's desire for an extended view. This window could be replaced with a low height window. This will fix the issue. 5 Kalati Road is positioned so the living spaces, kitchen and deck where I relax and entertain do not receive any morning sun, only the afternoon sun. The morning sun is at the front facing Kalati Road where the bathroom and 2 bedrooms are. The proposed pitch of the roof will cause overshadowing between 12 noon and 3 p.m. to my living and entertaining spaces, which will completely block the sun from entering at this time. This is the only time of day these areas get the sun. This will rid me of my only sunshine. Please do not consider the 9 a.m. to 12 noon to be my 3 hours sun requirement. Council could say my sunshine is unaffected at these hours and this meets the requirement for sunshine availability. Yet given I only get sunshine in the afternoon, I would not be receiving my 3 hours. The high-pitched roof could be replaced with a flat roof. This would help retain some sunshine. Please reject the large long window and the high-pitched roof and consider the recommendations which will resolve these 2 issues, which will allow me my entitlement of sunshine and privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9, motions on notice. Alderman Muller.
May I move the motion that has been circulated?
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Alderman Ewington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The motion is to re-engage Council's engineers to assess the feasibility and effectiveness of an alternate and higher discharge point to the management of storm water in Lauderdale. The current outfall to Ralphs Bay is inadequate, with over half the culvert full of water at high tide, meaning that seawater is actually flowing into the drainage canal rather than stormwater flowing out. I acknowledge the significant body of work by Council staff who over several years now have got us into a position where our obligations under the Urban Drainage Act have been met. But why would we not investigate an alternative proposal that would discharge at a higher point and prevent seawater ingress and future-proof Lauderdale from sea level rise? According to the landowner's engineers, the point at which the current drain would be diverted to the Lauderdale Canal is 0.75 metres higher and 320 metres closer to the Ralphs Bay discharge point. That, if my mathematics is, and it's rough, current discharge slope is around about 0.2%. This is one of the reasons that we have these problems. But this will increase to about 1%, which just happens to accord with the minimum drainage slope in the Plumbing Code of Australia for hard-formed drainage. So should sea level rise exceed 0.75 metres, there's a possibility that storm gates could be installed at the mouth of the canal to prevent the ingress of seawater and pump water into Ralphs Bay. Indeed, Lauderdale provides an opportunity for us to defend our coast from potential sea level rise, rather than the current policy, which is to retreat. This is not a planning matter per se, although it is clear that landowners and developers north of the canal would seek support for a residential zone in exchange for the two existing residential lots through which the new drains would flow. Furthermore, the drainage issue, which is a major sticking point in the area, would be solved, along with conditions requiring the detention of excess rainwater during heavy rainfall events. Most of the proposed new drains would be constructed at the landowner's cost, leaving council with responsibility for the culverts beneath North Terrace. With most of the new drains on private land, the only, if any, cost for council will be two new culverts beneath North Terrace. I urge my colleagues to support investigating this exciting opportunity. And so it's an opportunity which will solve a long-term problem with this particular area and allow the development to occur. And for Alderman Warren's comfort, there are no close associated issues with these particular developers, and Font PR have not been involved.
Alderman Ewing.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, as Alderman Mulder pointed out there, I mean, look, we're doing the drainage plan at Lauderdale for a reason, and a pretty good reason. I think it's widely accepted that we know we have to deal with what's there at the moment, separate to whether we do anything to the inner part of Lauderdale in the future. Totally separate issues, but obviously this option hasn't been considered up until now. We've done some work on it. The council staff have been looking into it. You know, there's been a little bit of to and fro over the last few years, as we quite clearly saw in relation to our discussion about this matter at the last planning meeting. But the fact that it hasn't been investigated to the level that it should be, you know, suggests to me that we really need to look at it. I mean, the bottom line is, it would be negligent of us not to consider this plan because it hasn't been put in front of us before, and we haven't done the work to determine whether it would work better than what our current structure is. And as Alderman Mulder pointed out there, the changes in the height of discharge, the fact that it could be used for a potential change in the way that we do the whole drainage plan at Lauderdale, suggests to me that, you know, it's a way to, you know, like I said, we'd be negligent if we didn't look at it. And the critical thing that we all need to look at with this one is that the benefits are not just for, you know, it's for the existing landholders in Lauderdale and the residents in there that have got concerns about some of the drainage issues now and into the future. You know, there's a concern obviously to the landholders down there. They want to look at what the potential options are for the use of their land. But this is a whole of community issue, because if there's a way that we can deal with the drainage down at Lauderdale at a lower cost with a more effective solution that saves the council money, well then that's a benefit to the whole community as well. So while people in other parts of the city might think, well, it's not concerning them, but it does. And like I said, if we don't at least take a good look at this option, well, I mean, we potentially have wasted a lot of money on a drainage plan that doesn't look at all the options that are open to us. And you know, we've got to realise here that, you know, it's not every day we get the opportunity to be given, you know, a large parcel of land to deal with, you know, a major issue that affects a whole community. So I think we, you know, like I said, we'd be negligent if we didn't look at it, and I encourage my fellow aldermen to support this plan because of the benefits to the existing landholders and the wider community, because the potential benefits to all of us are, you know, quite significant, and I think, you know, it's certainly worth a look. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be supporting this motion because we've expended considerable time and treasure up to date looking at how we alleviate drainage challenges in this area. They are substantial, and we must be judicious and be agnostic on whether this is going to be a solution or not. That's totally fine. But I think it's important that something like this is put into the mix to better inform us when it comes to that decision. Elements of this that are before us right this moment are physics and how it will work, it flows and sort of that, and that is critically important. But I'm going to name up what is also important for this, and that will be environmental considerations. I don't want the canal to be turned into a stagnant, mosquito-ridden sump to take water and just sit there. And we do need to weigh up a whole lot of things with this. We can't just transfer a problem. We can't just degrade a loved and cherished community asset as a trade-off for other things. All of these things, it's a really complicated matter. So all I'm stressing is I support this. I think it'll be really good for us to get this information to hand, but it'll be really important that there's the environmental dimension as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting the motion. We are required under the Urban Drainage Act to actually have stormwater management plans for our city. And my understanding is that there has been a great deal of work done by the officers with a great deal of data that we are yet to look at. And my understanding is also that in the next few weeks we will look at what has been found as far as the data is concerned in an overarching manner. And that it will take several months to actually look at this data in detail, right down to the individual property level. So my thoughts are that we actually have not looked at the information, we have not been briefed, so therefore I do not understand why the rush to spend at least $10,000 on a report when we do not know the facts. So as far as I'm concerned, we actually need to have that workshop in relation to the overarching methodology that has been used to date, where we are going into the future, why we are doing this, so that we can then make an informed decision. We spent months and months deliberating on a break-even budget. This $10,000 is not budgeted for, it's not in the estimates, and therefore that will mean that we do not have a break-even budget. Before I am going to actually support expending money over and above what we have decided on in the budget deliberations, I need a lot more information. So I won't be supporting Alderman Moulder's motion. Perhaps in the future I might, and I would expect that it would come to us as an officer's report and recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting to hear Alderman Bomberto's comments in relation to the break-even budget, and of course the deliberations that we went through at that particular time indicate, amongst other things, that the core issues that confront the City of Clarence, and one of which is in fact the stormwater concerns that we have not only in Lauderdale but right across the city centre. And we have a drainage proposal that has been discussed in part by the officers in relation to some of these areas which are prone to inundation. And as a result of that, we are basically moving ahead with that to address one of these most pressing issues that I believe is important for the council to consider. And Lauderdale is one of those. And by the very nature of investigating this, and I think Alderman Walker has summed it up quite well. If you want to know basically where to go and what council is going to do in Lauderdale or any other part of the city, then it's a core problem that needs to be addressed. And by the very nature of taking this course of action, which will in fact come back to us with a lot of other matters that relate to drainage in Lauderdale as part of this total cost of the drainage matter that confronts the city, I think it's appropriate to spend the money. And as you know, Mr Mayor, I've always been very concerned about how we spend our money. But it's always been, whilst I've been in this place over the years, the core issues, whether it's drainage, whether it's costs of services, whether it's roads, footpaths, whatever. This is one of those issues, and we would, I think, be neglecting our duties if we decide not to proceed with this. It's better to have all the facts and know exactly whether this particular issue and also what is being proposed will work, and the only way in which we can do that is basically proceed along this course, and I will support the motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a few points. I'm not quite sure how Lauderdale Canal would become stagnant if we put more water into it. Currently it's tidal at the moment. Tides flows in, tides flow out. On the rare occasions, on the occasions where there is excessive stormwater runoff, or where there is stormwater runoff, that now will supplement the flow and the amount of water in the canal that's flowing in and out of the canal. So I'm not too sure how it would be stagnant, unless of course we're talking about the storm gates, which actually are storm gates, and they are only lowered when there is an unexpected high tide and a rainfall event which would cause inundation. So I think those issues, of course they'll be assessed, but I'm not so concerned about them. I'm a bit bemused by Alderman von Berto's approach to say that we can't spend $10,000 that's unbudgeted, that we need to crash ahead with a project which in the General Manager's comments reveals upgraded and enlarged stormwater outlets underneath South Arm Highway, totally at council's expense, to be replaced by some other ones which upgraded, enlarged and multiple discharges into the North Terrace, Lauderdale, which won't be blocked at high tide and will cost considerably less, if anything. So I really don't see the logic behind not going into something, spending up to $10,000, not much more than $10,000. And probably, as we were advised by the General Manager this afternoon, that it would probably be much less than that because the data has already been collected. So really it's a question of the reason we wouldn't charge into this at this point in time is because we don't want to make the best decisions, because we don't want to save money, because we don't want to actually solve it. What I suspect is that we have an ideological objection to any development in this particular land, and the trouble with engineering reports is that you can't hide behind them when you start pursuing your ideological objections, because the science won't be there to back it up. There can be no harm in assessing these criteria. There can be no harm in actually making as fully informed a decision as we can, particularly one that is likely to be more effective, and particularly one that saves us money.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is as reflected on the board. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Moving on to item 11.2.1, petition. Petition regarding a planning application at Shop 514 Edgeworth Street, Lorraine. Recommendation is that Council notes the report and that it's also a planning matter for later this evening. If I could have a move and second. Thank you, Alderman Jones. Seconder. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Is there any discussion? Okay, so put the motion. All those in favour? That's passed unanimously. So I now advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. first item on the agenda there is 11.3.1, a development application at 6 Shoreline Drive, Howrah, for alteration and addition to a supermarket. Thanks, Alderman Newington. Do I have a seconder, please? Alderman Chong, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I suppose, what we see with this one is a change due to circumstances that are changing the way that we do business, the way that we live in the community these days. There are some issues that we deal with from time to time when it comes to parking, which can make the decisions difficult. But I think in this situation here, the benefits in terms of the number of people that are wanting to be able to pick up from their own car, and the numbers of cars that are going to be able to get through this new structure will mean that hopefully the car parking requirements are a little bit less than what they are currently at the moment. And I think it's just the way we need to be able to react to the changes in the way that we do things moving forward. And I think it's a more than reasonable proposal that we should be supportive of, and give the people who want to do this and the businesses that see this as the future, they would have done their research and found out this is the way to go. And I'm more than comfortable in supporting this motion. I encourage my fellow aldermen to do so as well.
Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's a very smart way to reflect people's changing habits.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When you look at the design and you see car parks go on to 3 click and collects, it intuitively doesn't sit comfortably, but the bottom line is it is a change of pattern, which is what has been mentioned. It is about increased turnover, so it's probably break even or better as far as utilisation goes in that sense. But also, we're still in the interesting COVID environment. The liberties we've been enjoying for the past few months, something that might not be available if there's another big outbreak for a while, and click and collect suits well for that. It suits well for people with mobility issues. It de-intensifies the utilisation within the supermarket. So whether some of those things are strictly planning matters, you can have a debate about. I think they do support the case that we should support it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Yes, I'll be supportive of it on basically planning grounds, but I don't think enough attention has been given to the traffic flows, which are, of course, a planning matter. Some of those traffic flows, and it's not that they can be conditioned because they're on the site, but what we're doing is we're putting more traffic into the dead-end area of Clarence Street. So there is issues there with parking of vehicles and things like that, but there's also a big issue at the junction of Clarence Street and Howrah Road and Shoreline Drive, where they meet. And at that intersection, if you're travelling on Clarence Street, either north or south, there is a bend in the road. Yet there are 3 lanes coming from Clarence Street towards the shopping centre. The middle lane is obscured by cars turning right, and all the traffic that is now, and the increased traffic that is now going to be coming out of the Clarence Street access, Council will need to have some good hard look at whether or not it's time to put an arrow or something there to allow people to actually cross without having to double check for pedestrians and for traffic that's blind, they can't see, and just suddenly pops up on the intersection beside a car that's turning right. So, I will support the motion, but I think it's about time. We need to have a look at the ramifications of this, and perhaps I shall put an alderman's request in, or to have a look at the traffic arrangements in that particular area.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Vonman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, like the previous speaker, I don't live on Clarence Street in Howrah, so I can't talk first hand about the impact of traffic flows. What I do, however, Mr Mayor, is, as we all do, is the benefit of the report before us tonight. And I think that on all planning grounds, this one stacks up. It stacks up very nicely, and it obviously is there to meet changing consumer behaviour. So I think it's a fantastic step forward. I commend the developers.
Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Newington.
Only quickly, just to address a couple of comments by my colleagues. Look, I certainly think that the parking issue in the city certainly needs to be addressed. I mean, the big issue with all of this, and in relation to the points that Alderman Mulder raised, well, he didn't actually raise them, he did it in a workshop, about the long-term parking for staff in some of our, certainly in Rosny and certainly in around the shoreline. I think most of the time we can get, and if our car parks are taken up with the long-term staff car parking, that's something we need to address, and I encourage us to get into that area as soon as possible. And I certainly think, the intersection, this will force us to look at that intersection and look at, bike use through that area, pedestrian use, the school, more people, in and around that area. I think certainly we need to be looking at that as well. But once again, I encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you. So the motion is a recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Alderman Chong. 11.3.2 is a development application at Shop 514 Edgeworth Street, Lorraine, change of use to bottle shop. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have circulated an alternative motion in relation to the...
Do we have a seconder? Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. The motion reads, and I don't want to read it verbatim, but basically in a nutshell, that the development application for a change of use to a bottle shop at Shop 6, 14 Edgeworth Street, Lorraine.
Shop 5, I think.
5, thank you. 14 Edgeworth Street, Lorraine. Thank you. Be refused for the following reasons. The proposal does not satisfy performance criteria 20.3.1p1, as it is likely to result in an unreasonable impact on the residential amenity of the area, as hours of operation of the use within 50 metres of a residential zone. If those of us who are familiar with this particular proposal on Edgeworth Street, those residential properties are definitely within the 50 metre requirement, or they're within that 50 metres, and therefore there is that unreasonable impact on the residential amenity that will result from the operation of this particular development if it's to go ahead. The proposal does not satisfy the performance criteria 20.3.2p1, as noise emissions measured at the boundary will cause environmental harm within the adjoining residential zone. And as I mentioned in part 1, this is within the 50 metre of that residential zone, and it's within earshot of those particular residences that abut the Edgeworth Street area. I refer Council to the to page 45 of the officer's report, and under the planning assessment 4.1, in determining an application for any permit, the planning authority must, in addition to matters required by section 51.2, take into consideration all applicable standards and requirements in this planning scheme, and of course any representations received pursuant to and in conformity with section 57.5 of the Act. As my colleagues would be aware, a petition containing 173 signatories objecting to a bottle shop at Edgeworth Street, Lorraine Shopping Centre was lodged within that statutory timeline some weeks ago. This evening, Council received that petition and the officer's comments in relation to the statutory process in relation to those signatories. The matter is obviously being considered tonight under the planning provisions, and I've also spoken and in relation to those particular measures that relate to all applicable standards and requirements in the planning scheme, and the case of exercising discretion only insofar as the relevant discretion is being exercised. And in course, Mr Mayor, in summary, the proposal does not satisfy the planning provisions under performance criteria 20.3.1 and also under the performance criteria 20.3.2 P1, as it will have a unreasonable impact on the residential zone, on the residential properties within that zone and the amenity in that area. I seek Council's support.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I second the motion for the purpose of the debate, because I think it's a debate we have to have. Well, I was hoping that I wouldn't have to say anything, but I'm just going to ask Alderman James if in his reply he would like to sort of flesh out as to how going to and from existing shopping precinct is unreasonable, is an unreasonable impact on the residential amenity of the area, given the fact that there are many these sorts of facilities within an area within a lot closer than 50 metres of a residential area. And in fact, some have even are in co-joint buildings with residential areas. The other one is how the proposal, what are the noise emissions at the boundary that would cause environmental harm beyond those that are sort of happening at a shopping centre anyway? So I think, you know, for me to support this, I'd perhaps like some greater explanation as to how that's going to be. And relying on the fact that 173 signatories were represented, were received, and that the officers have commented on those things, without revealing that the officers have commented that it's a planning matter that we're going to discuss now, I don't think it was appropriate to imply that somehow or other the officers thought that this was a substantial planning matter to be dealt with in the planning. So if Alderman James would care to elucidate those sorts of points to me, I may be satisfied that this is a exception that we need to deal with.
A couple of things. First of all, I appreciate the fact that we are focusing on the planning aspects of this. Obviously, with being a bottle shop, it could be quite emotive in terms of whether ethically it's right or it's wrong, but we are dealing with it from a planning point of view, and I commend the Alderman so far who've spoken in that capacity. Secondly, I do think it appropriate that the officer's remarks in regard to the petition mention the fact that it is a planning item, and that's quite relevant to the whole process, and it would be wrong, I think, of the officers to make a recommendation knowing that it was at the same meeting we're going to consider it as a planning item. I think it was essential that that be mentioned as such. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank the 173 people who took the time and effort to submit a response in the petition. It's really important to care about your neighbourhood and care about your community. However, as the Mayor so rightly points out, this is a planning matter, not a moral judgment. And as a planning issue, I'd like to draw my colleagues' attention to the bottle shop in Lindisfarne, which is just a couple of blocks from where I live. It certainly is closer to residential areas than this one is proposed, I think. It wasn't recently within a block and a half of a childcare centre and a primary school. It's been operating for a number of years. I don't believe there are significant traffic or noise issues. So I'm quite comfortable in accepting the officer's recommendation on this, and I won't be supporting this alternative motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker and then Alderman Ewington.
I won't be supporting this motion. I understand the community sentiment in a hyper-local area of concern, and that is a matter that's dealt with at a separate authority that is in relation to the regulation of alcohol, tobacco and other matters in the state. This is a planning matter, and I would historically note what Alderman Warren has said, Mr Mayor, but I'd also point out how things went when this council took it upon themselves to reject a bottle shop on the corner of Wentworth Street and Clarence Street. It didn't. The grounds weren't sufficient. I think that some of the planning reasons there were novel, and it was bound to be the case when it was appealed in another area. I sit as a member of the Planning Authority, as do all of you, and whether it's a bottle shop, a menswear shop, whether it's an outreach bookshop for the Fabian Society or a theatre testing precinct for the Church of Scientology, I sit here as a member of the Planning Authority and have to judge it on issues of parking, hours of operation, as we all do. And a report's been done and it is compliant, and as I said, I'll be supporting the officer's recommendations on the basis of when or if this motion is rejected.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, I'll just quickly, I think, you know, I mean, the bottom line is, I mean, alcohol is a legal product that's widely available in our community. when you suggest that the people of Lorraine can't tolerate having another bottle shop in their community.
Alderman Newington, I need to keep focused on the planning
planning
aspects of this,
well,
please.
Okay, well, I think it's a bit rude for people to suggest that anyway. But look, the planning side of it's quite clear. I mean, it's an existing commercial area. It's no different. I can't see it being any different than the current shops and premises that the businesses are in there. And the other point that I'd like to make is, it's important that us as a council put out a business-friendly message, and that we are there to comply with the policy and regulations.
Once again, Alderman Newington, we've got to stick to the planning aspect of this.
I just encourage everyone to knock this one back, and we'll
thank you.
Foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, like the previous speaker, I don't think our role is to act as moral police. Our role here clearly tonight is to act as a planning authority. That's what we're sitting at. The analogy, as much as people might be surprised, the analogy that Alderman Warren used is someone I was going to use, because like her, Steve's Liquor and Lindisfarne is my local bottler. Alderman Warren is slightly closer than what I am, but I can assure you it's within walking distance of my house. There is adequate parking there. It is a legal business conducting itself legally. Across the road, of course, there's the early Child's Play Early Learning Centre. They had the pleasure of opening 18 months ago. And Mr Mayor, there's never been any concern from the parents or the operators at that childcare centre about the operation of Steve's Liquor. This is a sound proposal before us this evening, and the officer's recommendation is a sound proposal before us this evening. On those grounds, I certainly will not be supporting this alternative motion.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like a number of colleagues here tonight, I feel for the people in the area around. They've obviously, there's a number of them that have some concerns, but I'd just like to reiterate once again, we're dealing with a planning scheme, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
I'm the last one left. Yes, I've done a lot of reflecting on this topic, and obviously in local government, every now and then we're served up a sandwich that was probably produced over at the Rosny treatment plant. It's not anyone that particularly enjoys having something that's contentious in the community, and obviously the passion on show with the petition and some of the people who've made deputations to us offline has shown that. So I've gone to the effort of getting back to a few of the people who've been in touch about this and don't support it. And I think by and large they actually understand the way the system works and our role in it. Like, we're not, as I cannot remember who made the comments about whether it's a menswear shop, it might have been next to me, sorry, about, what sort of shop goes in here any more than we can tell someone who owns a house who they can lease it to. I guess people get it, and there is a bit of angst on the process, I suppose, and some powerlessness that we often see with some planning issues. As well as reading the report, I also spent a bit of time over the past few days reading over the guide to Tasmanian liquor licensing, etc., and that's touched on in definitely 5.1 in the report. But perhaps, maybe for the benefit of some in the community who'll be watching this, who've signed the petition or whatever, could we explain the process once it's left here around the licensing issues, as was referred to by another previous speaker?
It is a different process, which is outside of Council's control. It's probably not appropriate to go into that right now. I guess, gentlemen, how can we deal with this?
It's certainly not a process that we're familiar with, other than the applicant would need to make an application to the Liquor Licensing Board, and then it goes through an assessment process from there. The ins and outs of that process are not something we're familiar with.
Thank you. But just to sort of get across the point that there is another step, as alluded to in the report. Also, we know what these reports look like in black and white to people who don't get the scheme, so it does put us in a difficult position. But I think other people have touched on also the issues around other suburban bottle shops, including one in my home. I don't really like the sort of standing on high element about that either, although that's not really part of the planning scheme. I guess just to sort of sum up is that basically what everyone else has sort of said is that this isn't really in the realms of our control, and we have to have a pretty sort of, pardon the pun, sober look at it, and that's sort of why the result's going to be the way it probably is tonight.
Thank you. So, robbery reply, Alderman Jones.
Yes, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. The reason for this matter coming to Council is because it's a change of use. And under our planning scheme, if there is a change of use, then it has to be advertised and it has to be obviously made aware of the community in relation to it. It does not comply in accordance with the local business zone, and on page 46, the proposed use is considered consistent with the zone purposes, but it is in fact, it is outside and is not in accordance with the business zone, with the exception of the following points, and that is the local business zone. And in that, the hours of operation, the impact on the amenity of the area has to be taken into consideration. There is nothing got to do with what the Lindisfarne bottle shop basically is operating under or what provisions it operated at the time of their DA. It's got nothing to do with the Clarence Street proposal. That's the bottle shop adjacent to the Clarence High School. This is being gauged on the merits in relation to
would you please take a seat while we have a point of order?
I put that we put this motion and vote on it. Will they do that?
I need a seconder for a procedural motion on those lines.
Second.
Okay, so the procedural motion is that the motion be put. All those in favour? Against? The motion, I'll do that again. All those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4. Against? The motion is lost. Please continue your right of reply, Alderman Jones.
Thanks for that. As I was saying, it's got nothing to do with the Clarence Street bottle shop or, in fact, the Lindisfarne bottle shop. It's irrelevant. The matter we are debating here tonight is in relation to the Edgeworth Street. And I tried to explain to, not only to my colleagues, but also to the citizens of Clarence, that this council does have the authority to be able to consider it as to whether it is in accordance with the planning scheme. And the officers have identified that there are 2 provisions within this that do not comply on the basis of the performance criteria. And as I said in my earlier part of the presentation, it's well within the 50 metres, which is specified in the acceptable solutions. It's well within that area of noise emissions, and it's also not in keeping with the amenity of the area, because the proposal is unlikely to have an impact in the sense of the business zone, but it will have an impact on the amenity of the area. I seek council support.
Thank you. So the motion is refusal. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Could we have Alderman Blomley and Alderman Ewington? Alderman Ewington's seconded it. Alderman Blomley's moved it. Thank you.
I think I was going to tell Mr Mayor, I urge colleagues to support the recommendation.
Mr Mayor, I thought Alderman Ewington was the one who foreshadowed the officer's recommendation.
I'm happy to second it.
I didn't hear him actually say he was going to foreshadow it. I heard him say he was going to support it.
In a clumsy way, maybe.
Well,
I did say that, yes.
Point of order, Mr Mayor, he did say he was going to.
Okay, Alderman Blomley, are you willing to... thank you very much. The motion is moved by Alderman Ewington, seconded by Alderman Blomley. Thank you.
Look, only as per office recommendation, I think we've said enough about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers?
Yes.
Alderman Jones.
Yes, okay, Alderman.
Look, please don't be diverted.
I won't be diverted. Thank you very much. I'll just move this way and address the chair. Look, for the reasons I mentioned...
Point of order, Mr Mayor, from the chair.
Sorry, is there a
I move that the question be put, Mr Mayor.
Do I have a seconder that the motion be put? Alderman Ewington. I think as the mover you can't do that. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Procedural motion. All those in favour of the motion be put. Against?
I think that's the gag, isn't it?
The motion is lost.
No, that's one. That's one.
Now we'll put it.
Sorry?
Yeah, well, the motion you vote.
The motion was one.
Let me put the procedural motion again and see if I can get the counting right. All those in favour that the motion be put. Hands right up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Against? The motion is 1. Therefore, the motion is to be put. As on the board there, a recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour?
Just a point of clarification, and it pains me knowing to do this, but don't you need an absolute majority of 7 for putting a motion?
We need a majority.
Just a majority.
Yes.
Clarification.
I think we're up to the point. The recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Could Alderman Bomberto, I understand you want to leave for the next motion? Could you let Alderman Chong know that it's okay to come back in? So moving on to item 11.3.3, it's a development application at 3 Kalahati Road, Rosny, addition to dwelling. If I could have a mover in a second, please. Alderman Ewington, second to Alderman Bromley. Alderman Ewington.
Not said enough tonight. Oh, look, I think this is quite clear. I just encourage my fellow aldermen to go with the officer's recommendation here and approve the application to do this work.
Thank you. Alderman Blum.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As we're advised, this proposal satisfies the relevant requirements of the scheme and is therefore quite appropriately recommended by the officers for conditional approval.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Yeah, look, on page 69 of the officer's report, under General Residential Zone, under clause 10.4.2A3 of the planning scheme, the proposal requires a variation to the building envelope standards as part of the proposed dwelling addition exceeds out of the building envelope. The proposed dwelling is set back 3 metres and 1.8 from the side boundaries, which is in contrary to the planning scheme, and for that reason I will not be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder?
I was just going to make the point that that for those watching, it's a very salient point to talk about the acceptable solutions, but we all know that the performance criteria are the guide, and I think you'll find that this meets the performance criteria.
Well, let me make that clear. The point that Alderman Mulder was making is that just because it doesn't meet the acceptable solutions, it does not mean that it doesn't meet the planning scheme. The performance criteria enable it to meet the planning scheme.
Are you looking at me?
I'm just making that point.
Oh, sorry.
Are there any other speakers, please? Sorry, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to thank Ms Hardwick for her deputation on this, for not only raising issues of concern but proposing solutions. And I just, again, state my disappointment that neighbours can't work together for mutually beneficial solutions that meet planning scheme. I do note the shadowing diagram towards the end of our report here, and that there is a missing representation for the hours from 12 to 3, but looking at the representation at 12 and the representation at 3 and filling in the gaps, I can see that shadowing is going to have a significant impact on the amenity of that residence, so I will not be supporting this.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Newington.
I'll just...
Sorry, I missed you.
Yeah, that's right.
Walker.
But very briefly, we did receive probably all those representations, and we did hear the points raised tonight. And it might sound like a cop-out, but it's the heart and the drive. It is, whilst this will no doubt have an impact on the adjoining residents and on the quality of life that they have been experiencing with their backyard. I know the comments by Alderman Warren about
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, I will be supporting the recommendation, but I'd also like to underline that fact that it would be nice sometimes if a compromise could be made. I know that's not what we're discussing now, but there has been some attempts by the owner of the property that's going to be impacted the most to actually try and get a compromise. It hasn't happened. However, I will be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Youngkin.
Just on those couple of issues about neighbours getting along, I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a set of rules that they've got to make a final decision, or else we go round and round in circles forever. And I think if it meets the planning scheme and meets the performance criteria, well, I think we have an obligation to approve these sorts of things, or else we go round and round in circles all the time, because some people are never going to agree at times. But anyway, I encourage everyone to support this one.
Thank you. So the motion is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. Those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Could we recall Alderman von Berdo, please? Item 11.3.4 is a Section 43A amendment to a general residential zone use to professional and business at 7 Gordon Till Road, Belrive. Move and seconder, please. Alderman Moller, thank you. Seconder, Alderman Walker. Alderman Moller.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this one's being fairly straightforward. I think we've got incremental creep of the commercial zone going on in this particular area, and I make the observation that since the commercial zone was first established, since the borders between places like Rosley Park and Lorraine and other those things were originally established, we've now moved down the process where we don't run boundaries down the middle of a road, so that one side of the road is this and the other side of the road is that. This is a legacy issue, and it's not surprising that the commercial pressures are gradually increasing the number of commercial operations on the other side of Gordons Hill Road to match the many that are there and the many that have been there for many, many years in these things. So that doesn't mean that the people who live on this road, who want to live in this particular area, can't continue to operate their residential things, which is, I think it would be unfair if we just blanketly changed the zoning. But when these proposals come up, I think we're duty-bound in the sense of logic to agree with them.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yeah, pretty much what the motion said. It's quite logical when you look at the activities in those surrounding areas, proximity to things. I would also note that I think that the attachment 4 should give other elements and comfort as to the strength of the residents' application as well.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Yeah, look, a question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Lovell in his capacity as, we used to use the term city planner, but in his capacity as manager of city planning. Mr Lovell, on page 95 of the officer's report, it refers to obviously the section 43A proposal, which incorporates the amendment and also some development. Why wasn't this, or is this 43A a different process to what we considered in relation to the LPS matters that came before council? Is it because of the 43A dual push that would make this sort of not a consideration under the LPS matters that would ultimately go to the TPC? Could you just please explain why we didn't deal with this under the LPS as distinct from now looking at a section 43A combined approach?
Mr Mayor. I don't recall the applicants making a submission of the LPS.
Thanks, Mr.
That's my
Long.
recollection. And in this, I would say, in relation to this application, the applicants have, through their consultants, made a combined application, perhaps because they it would suit their purposes perhaps better than through the LPS, because instead of just a rezoning or a change of use in a zone for a specific departure, they also get a permit through this process. So it's a combined amendment to the scheme and a permit in one go.
Thank you. Thank you. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Moore?
No, Mr Mayor.
So the recommendation before us is first of all to initiate the amendment for a change of use. All those in favour? Against? Carried. I'm sure, was that carried unanimously, Alderman Edmonds? Were you in favour? Yes, okay. Carried unanimously. Yeah. That concludes our business as a planning authority. So let's move on to asset management, 11.5.1. I think adoption of council's policy about no spray register. I think that's Alderman Warren's movement. Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Would you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to thank the council officers for all the work that they've done on this after I raised this as a motion earlier in the year. It's an area of concern for a number of our residents. I note in the officers' report an increasing concern, an increasing number of people contacting council with concerns about the chemicals that are used near or on their properties. And I note that other councils in the Greater Hobart area, like Hobart, Kingborough, Huon Valley, Sorell and Tasman, and Glenorchy in the process, also have a no spray register. It is an issue that is getting quite a lot of media attention in the press, so a tautology, but certainly there are a number of large court cases in the States and here about the safety or otherwise of glyphosate-based products, and while banning them altogether was not a popular move here, I think we owe it to our ratepayers for them to opt out if they so choose. And I think this is a sensible policy which puts boundaries around that it is a weed control measure. If they undertake to do the work, then we undertake not to spray chemicals on their property. So I urge my colleagues to support it.
Good. Alderman Kennedy.
Nothing further than I supported it then, I support it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Blomley and then...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I too supported this motion exactly 11 months ago to the day. It is, as I said at the time, a sensible step forward for those residents of Clarence that don't wish to have their properties sprayed with these types of chemicals. So I commend Alderman Warren on this motion. I think it's a sensible step forward. Mr Mayor, I do note though that it's taken 11 months to get to this stage. And whilst it's a sound policy, I really would just flag that clearly I think we need to look at resourcing. I know we've cut the budget back to the bare bones, but if it takes 11 months to get a policy to this council, a motion that was moved on the 21st of October last year, in my view, that's not fast enough. So with those few words, I'm pleased with the policy where we've landed, but I am concerned it's taken 11 months to get here.
Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support this proposal on the basis I think people should have a right to decide what chemicals are used outside their houses. But we get this continual citing of US cases as justification that somehow or other this is a dangerous chemical that certifies bans. Now, the predominant feature in most of these US cases are their jury cases, where completely understandable, you have a plaintiff who is dying and ill with cancer and some other thing, who has used this particular product, pitted against some global chemical giant with almost endless resources. It's no wonder that they get a sympathy vote. It's no wonder that they get that particular thing. There is no causal link been established by any country in the world that suggests that glyphosate used in the immediate vicinity by the people using it, wearing masks and appropriate PPE and following appropriate processes, are going to suffer consequences and things like that, which they may not have done otherwise. So the causal link hasn't been established. The Federal Drug and Food Administration have not found any reason to not certify it as safe and accordant. So although my purpose of supporting this is not to have another shot at a perfectly safe chemical, without which I think thousands of people might be starving around the world right now, but to point out that this is a question of I ought to have a right outside my house that someone else doesn't go and spray my nature strip with this weed killer or my area with this weed killer. And that's because it's a question of personal choice. But I might say the underlying thing is that there's also responsibilities for the control of weeds. And if the landowners aren't controlling the weeds, then I think there's an obligation across the board that council controls them. And that might mean that you might have a no spray register, but the weeds must be controlled. So with a right, there is a concomitant responsibility, and that is the one that I urge.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
Yeah, and I think the stuff that Alderman Mulder just spoke about is part of the policy. I think it's a good first step. It is pretty comfy, but nonetheless, it does give you choice. I mean, I think when we talked about this even before the original motion, is that talk about how uneasy you feel when you do actually catch the scooter going past with the herbicides, and you don't see them every time, and then is that the afternoon that your kids are down there playing with chalk or something like that. So I think this is good, at least in the sense that people are agitated or uncomfortable with it, they can make a proactive step. It's not also not just about residents though. I think also broadly this has workplace implications. I know Hydro and now Tas Networks are facing the consequences of poor practices in the past around some of the use of these types of materials. I would just encourage, outside of the 12 elected people, that as an operational entity, we continue to keep our ears to the ground about best practice that we can continue to do around safety with the herbicides, but also alternative measures that can potentially be looked at in the years going forward. So it certainly has my support, yes, 11 months ago, and I think it would be a great step for the city.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Yerington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I certainly support the right for individuals to choose what to do on their own land. I'm quite clear on that in plenty of other situations, and I certainly think this is the case here. But they also, at the same time, I think that the points that Alderman Mulder raised about the science behind it, and to be honest, I think there's a far too much scaremongering that goes on in our community in lots of ways, and I would hate to see this now morph into something further down the track. And when I hear Alderman Edmonds say things like, this is the first step, well, I mean, I'd like to know what the next step is, because that's my concern, that this opens the floodgates and then everyone starts saying they can't use it on sports grounds, and the cost of us maintaining the grounds through scaring us into submission is a problem that we need to consider. And until I see the clear evidence in a court of law where it's scientifically provable, I'd certainly have my concerns. But if people choose not to do it and they look after their land and the weeds are maintained and we're able to continue with the appropriate policies for our staff in terms of how they use it, and the community still stays nice and clean and tidy without weeds growing everywhere, well, I suppose it's worth giving a chance. But like I said, I want to reiterate my concerns about a first step to what, and I think as we go forward, I'd like to think that we keep that in mind and not just let things keep going for the sake of it. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no other speakers, right of reply. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I recognise, and thank you, Ms. Alderman Blondin, for reminding me that it was actually October last year, but I guess we've had a 6-month hole in our agenda this year where we took up a lot of workshops working on the budget not once but twice because of COVID, and I understand that officers have been under the pump, so I thank them for getting it to us at this stage. Look, I could talk about precautionary principles and better safe than sorry, but I prefer to focus on the fact that we are responding to our community and giving them the choice. And thank you, Alderman Edmonds, for suggesting that we continue to look at best practice and alternative measures. I'd hate to see us say, be standing here in 10 years' time saying, well, we poisoned our people because it was the cheapest option, if there are other ways of doing it. And, in terms of it being a first step, well, I think the first step to mitigating the effects of tobacco was to recommend that everybody smoke menthol cigarettes. So, I think we need to be careful. This is a sensible approach, and we'll continue to watch how the situation develops. But I do urge you to support giving our residents the right to choose.
So the motion before us is that the Council adopts the no spray register policy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to governance. 11.7.1, that Council approves an easement for Tas Networks at 65A Hants Road. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Second, Alderman Chong, I think it was. Would you like to speak to this?
As per the recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay, so I'll put the motion that we approve the easement. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.2 is the creation of a private right-of-way at 90 Gordons Hill Road, Lindisfarne. I'll move and second, please. Alderman Ewington, thank you. Second, Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak to this?
No, Mr Mayor, as per recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Other speakers? Motion then for approval. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.3 is that Council gives notice of intent to lease to the Equestrian Tasmania and the Hobart Archers. Thanks, Alderman Ewington. Second, Alderman Kennedy. You need to speak?
Oh, no, I'd just like to speak on this, having had a little bit to do with the area and also to some of the people involved in the equestrian side of things, the archery side of things in recent time. I think it's a piece of land that, we've given a bit of ability to have a bit of a long-term control over it, the opportunity for the people who are passionate about what they do to come up with a way of improving that land, not only for the sports and the recreational activities that they do, but to help us work together with the council in terms of the paths and the tracks and the trails and really make it into something that we should be proud of for the wider community. I think it's a great move to, and I know they've put in a lot of work to get to that point, and I think it's going to be something that a lot of people in our community and from around the state are going to get a lot of enjoyment and use out of into the future.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? Okay, so I'll put the motion for approval. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Thank you, Alderman Sharon von Berto. .7.4 is that Council adopts the community recovery grants recommended in the agenda papers. Moved Alderman Chong, second Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak to it?
Certainly, thank you, Mr Mayor. As we can...
Sorry, was there...
the amended motion.
The amended motion is up there. I'll just point out that there's item C has been added to the agenda that's issued in the agenda papers. Thank you.
In June, as is mentioned in the report, Council approved $215,000 split between the Community Recovery Grants, Social Recovery Action Plan and work on homelessness. Grant guidelines were formulated and sent out and applications closed on the 17th of August, with 29 applications being received. Subsequently, 18 applications are recommended for full or partial approval for this total of $55,916.59. I should particularly like to commend the hours of work put in by the Grants Officer, Janet Rinkowski, and the 3 external members of the committee. The 29 applications were extensive, and there was a great deal of work undertaken, as Alderman Kennedy can attest, in going through them and in the subsequent follow-ups for a number of grants where we had questions too. The grant applications were very varied, from marquees to sound systems to surfboards for nippers, but the successful grants, as you can see, all provide support in the Clarence area, supporting community resilience and participation. Those that were not supported were either deemed to be ineligible, for example, uniforms or infrastructure, or did not have a COVID recovery component. One issue that you may note in the grant information is that a couple were supported on condition that there is an emphasis on Clarence residents. This was particularly felt to be important where the providers were not based in Clarence. As monies are spent on a social recovery plan and homelessness, the intent is that the balance of this grant money allocation could be used there, or, as given in the motion, consideration given to a second round. The intent is to consider whether this is required in March to enable the monies to be expended in this financial year. I seek Council support for the distribution of grants as detailed in the report.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I thank Alderman Chong for moving the motion and accepting the evolution to include point C. That's point C I largely want to speak to because I do support A and B as that stands. I would also like to thank all those involved. I think it's probably not an easy process for them, but better than the 12 of us on a Monday. That said, we are talking about over $55,000 council budget, and that is 1,000th of our budget, and that is significant in this COVID environment. We have been forensic over every $1,000 or $2,000 amount, and all that point C hopes to do is to give that extra ability to have more than just necessarily a paragraph before us when we're making judgments by bringing it to a workshop. I don't expect that the whole thing would be smashed to pieces to be rebuilt, but if there were some questions or some areas where we wanted more understanding of the motivation and how the grant would be working, that would be the opportunity to get that process in mind. So I would seek the support of fellow aldermen so that going forward we can, as and where appropriate, be providing grants, but also as ultimately we bear the responsibility for signing off on them and the consequences. Therefore, I do think that options of putting C onto this matter will be, from a governance perspective, the wise thing. Seek support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Joe?
Yes, look, on page 194, it refers to, amongst other things, in part B, the question as an amount. It's dot point 2, part B on 194, an amount of $60,000 to fund practical homelessness initiatives within Clarence in partnership with relevant not-for-profit organisations and in accordance with Clarence Council's COVID-19 social recovery plan. And it's interesting to note that if we turn to page 196, no, it's not 196, it's in relation to, yes, 198, there was a suggestion, there was an alternative number of applications that were lodged but not recommended for funding, one of which is on page 198, which refers to the Clarence Lions Club supporting the homelessness. Now look, we've discussed this at length, and as far as I'm concerned, I will not support this whilst the Clarence Lions Club is left out of this issue. It's quite clear that we went to a lot of trouble, and I for one spoke at great length, as some of you wouldn't appreciate, but I did at the time, Mr Mayor, in incorporating and seeing something for our money in relation to the homelessness. To date, I haven't seen much at all, other than a lot of paperwork and a lot of what we'll do and what we wish that we'd like to do. In relation to this pitiful amount of 25, let's get it right, let's make sure we get it right here, 2,500, which the Clarence Lions Club is proposing to support the homelessness in Clarence, and the reason for knocking it back is better outcomes could be achieved by inviting the Lions Club to work in partnership with council as part of the council's recovery package through the homeless project. Absolutely exactly what our policy was that we determined, and this project has been knocked out for $2,500. Also, on another issue, on page 196, we have colony 47, search program Hire Me, for $4,134.20, and then a couple of dot points down, Hobart Bangladesh Community Incorporated, a day for mums. Now look, I'm not knocking in any way, shape or form the particular organisations that are listed here. However, there are two of those that I've just mentioned that I believe are providing this particular admin support, and they are not based in Clarence. Now, what are we doing here? Are we trying to foster good relationships in relation to those organisations? Now, the Clarence Lion Club has done immeasurable benefits for the city over the last 40 years, 30 years to my knowledge. I'm going back to 84. And they have been knocked out of this equation because of a very, very tokenism approach in relation to, will they go and work with council on a recovery package. I will not support this until we have some clear guidelines in relation to not only the Clarence Lions Club, but also for providers. Now, they may do it and they do a great job, but I will not support whilst there are organisations that have their admin and their support task and their organisation outside Clarence, when this is part and parcel, what I believe is written into the process of supporting actions that foster wellbeing and a healthy, safe and productive community, and assisting community-led projects that build community resilience and foster partnerships for recovery, but also making it locally relevant and respectful for those organisations that have been denied a funding, in this particular instance, where they are providing not only the facility within Clarence, but also that is providing a benefit to those particular organisations as well. There's nothing wrong with these organisations that purport to assist the Hobart community and beyond, but at the same time we should be looking at providers that are actually based in Clarence and providing their particular expertise and support to the citizens of Clarence.
Other speakers, please. Alderman Kennedy?
Yes, Mr Mayor, if I can just touch on the Clarence Lions situation there. The proposal was built around purchasing clothing and toiletries. Now, the work that was done with the committee showed us very clearly that this was just going to be another duplication, another layer of what was already being done. Even with YNAB, the same work has been done in that space. So I think we've made it very clear that we're happy to continue conversations perhaps next time with regards to what we could do. I mean, I think we've all worked at the Salvo's breakfast for homeless and we've all been out in that space. But this just was another layer of duplication of what was already being done on the city.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Chong.
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, and I guess just to reiterate what Alderman Kennedy said about the Lions, we absolutely recognise the amazing work that the Lions does in this area and felt that working directly with them on homelessness was a much more appropriate thing to do than them going out and purchasing toiletries to give to the Salvation Army. There are much better ways to use the funding. The other comment, I guess, is in relation to those organisations which are not based in Clarence. We don't have all of the charities and all of the organisations based in Clarence. Of course we don't. Many of them, the Salvo's head office is based in Hobart. Hobart City Mission is in Hobart. The Red Cross is based in Hobart. Doesn't mean we don't ever do any work with them. What we've done with these grants, and if you look at the two particular ones, is actually as part of a condition of the grant, say that it needs to be spent on the residents of Clarence, because we felt that that was the best way. These are good projects and should be supported. And that's how we've gone around making sure that it's the residents of Clarence that are looked after with this funding. I seek my fellow aldermen's support to approve these budgets.
So the motion is to approve the community recovery grants. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Could we invite Alderman Monberto back, please? Item 11.7.5 is that Council's sponsorship policy and that we adopt. Could I have a move and a second, please? Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second, Alderman Newington. Alderman Chong, would you like?
Just very briefly, I think it's important that we have a policy about how we deal with this. They tend to be ad hoc applications, and I think it's good that we have some guidelines.
Okay. Alderman Newington. Other speakers? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.7.6 is that Council adopts its meeting schedule for the next 2 years. Moved Alderman Edmonds, seconded Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak to it? Alderman Walker? No. Any other speakers? In that case, I'll put the motion that we adopt the meeting schedule. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 12 is Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Answers to questions previously taken in the council meeting I'll take as read and move to questions without notice, starting with Alderman Warren.
No, thank you.
Alderman Walker-James.
Yeah, question in relation, through you to the General Manager in relation to 19 Clarence Street in Howrah. My question through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Nelson. Mr Nelson, there has been some sort of not so pleasant discourse between some residents in relation to the adjoining properties abutting 19th Clarence Street. Is there, given that there has been now some resolution in relation to what is to proceed next, are you interested to sort of send a letter to those people, the Whitlands, just to sort of calm the waters and say, well, look, unfortunately we got off to a bad start, but now we have in fact reached an area of taking an amendment. So my question, is a long-winded approach, is the General Manager prepared to sort of calm the waters between the residents, Whitlands and the Edwards, in relation to where we stand now in relation to this, and try to sort of settle some of the issues that have been brought to the fore and which have made those residents in particular a little bit sort of unhappy with the way matters have been handled.
Thanks, Alderman James.
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. I must admit I'm a bit perplexed as to what I'm actually answering, or shall I say signing up for. I've had no correspondence with either of those parties for at least a couple of months, so I'm not sure what it is you are referring to, so maybe I can take that on notice and you can give me an update.
I can do that. Alderman Norman? I'm sorry, Alderman James has got a second question.
Thanks. Second question is in relation to Kangaroo Bay, the hotel development and so on. Is it proposed on the 12th of October to have some information available to the Alderman that will be circulated as part of the open meeting proposal Or is it proposed to have some information in closed meeting that obviously will only be available to the alderman, and that may hamstring their ability to be able to debate the issues?
It's too early to say at this point in time. We're still waiting for discussions between the General Manager and the parties concerned. Those discussions are still work in progress. When we know what the outcomes of those are, then we'll be in a position to schedule workshops and council meetings. The intention at this stage is to hold an open session, open meeting in regard to that on 12th October. We can't confirm that at this stage because negotiations are still taking place.
I know you answered my question earlier this evening, but my supplementary, and that is in relation to what information will be available to the public.
It's too early to say.
Or will there be information available to the public which will in fact help to assist, obviously not only the alderman in providing the debate, but also being able to at least canvass those issues with the public on the part of the line?
It is work in progress, Alderman James. Rest assured we'll release as much as we possibly can to the public as soon as it's available through the alderman. In other words, we'll be briefing the alderman before we brief the public. But
I just want to see some open transparency on the issue.
and so do I, Alderman James.
Thanks, sir.
Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I refer to the answer the General Manager provided earlier this evening to a question of notice from a member of the public, and also further to our discussion we had in recent times, Mr Mayor, both with you and the General Manager, which has involved the CIO and the staff behind me this evening, particularly regarding the availability of elected members to participate in council meetings when, through no reason of their own, they're not allowed, and we are now in a COVID environment, they're not able to attend a council meeting. Is there, the last advice I received the 9th of this month was that a workaround was not possible. I've proposed a potential way forward, and I would just like an update as to whether that's acceptable. Otherwise, Mr Mayor, as I've indicated previously, because I'm required by government rules to be in isolation on the 12th of October, I am in effect disenfranchised from being present here at that council meeting to participate in the democratic process.
We'll take the question, gentlemen.
Yes, thank you. The update I can provide, Alderman Blomley, is that we have written to the Director of Local Government and are awaiting a response. And that the question that we have posed is per our discussion at the workshop on Monday night. I think it was on Monday night. That if you are able to view the live feed, can you either email or text your vote to the chair of the meeting? And have that recognised. Now, I haven't got a response at this point in time, but as soon as I do, I will circulate that to all aldermen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr.
Alderman Gambetta, Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Clarence City Council has a YouTube page which he posts where people can look up meetings past and present. As such, I highly recommend it. But separate to that, 2 months ago, six short videos were put up in relation to Clarence Health Systems parts. So it's around 2 months ago. I know that it's had 23 views, of which possibly 8 are mine. If the technology and the voice-over was managed in-house, then it's a credit to our staff for the high-level elocution and way that they do this. However, if this was outsourced, I would like to know what was the cost and what that works out per view on the YouTube site. So I don't know if you have that information at hand.
We have that information. And Mr Tui, take it on notice, thanks.
Thank you. Also, a question either for you or the General Manager through the budgeting process. We discussed a range of things as we do with every budgeting, but it also included scope and level of funding for Help to Health. What it is, 2 months ago brings us roughly into July, which is the new financial year. has with this project, and how does it relate to what directives Alderman go through the budgeting process?
General Manager or Mr. Tui?
Mr. Tui might be.
Mr. Tui.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the focus, it was I preferred to take that on notice so I can give a more complete and accurate answer.
Thank you. Alderman Evans.
Thank you. First question is about Piper Road in Gilson Bay. Now, I believe there's plans afoot around the state of that road, which is cocking a hiding from trucks, particularly on the intersection of, I can't remember, the first street on the left. So I guess my question is, where are those works at, and will the works also look at the issues around possibly having a slip lane off the East Highway?
Mr. Grierson, are you able to help in that?
Through you, Mayor, the design is complete for the Pipers Road junction and upgrade up the road itself, and the works are out to tender. So there will be a report coming to council shortly for that contract.
Sorry, I can't hear. I understand. Can you? I think you said the design's complete,
yep.
The works are out to tender.
That's correct.
Then I missed the follow-up.
And just the question about whether there were slip lanes involved in that design.
Yeah, that includes a left slip lane off the highway.
Thank you.
Oh yes, the second question, picking up off a theme from Alderman James. My question is, in terms of the upcoming council meeting with the decision around Kangaroo Bay, whether as part of the either materials or briefing before that meeting, whether Alderman will be given a rundown of the terms of any potential buyback.
General Manager.
Thank you for the question, and we're still working with the developer at the moment to flesh out their proposal following from the workshop, so get down into the nuts and bolts of some details. I would expect at some stage very soon to be providing a briefing to Alderman. That would probably be at a workshop and most likely within the next fortnight. Well, it'll have to be within the next fortnight, so stating the obvious.
Yeah. But that particular issue, is that the buyback clause, is that something we'll be briefed on before October 12th?
Yes, absolutely. So just to be really complete about it, there are, in my mind, two elements to that. There's the proposal and the details of the proposal that the developer would wish to put forward. And then I need to brief Alderman in terms of the requirements of the contract and the advice that goes along with that prior to you considering that via a report.
Alderman Newton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just is there any update you can give us on the discussions with the relation to the extra access for the guys down at the airport roundabout for the development of?
Latest information I had is that it's going to the tribunal. Mr. Lovell, do you know when that's going to the tribunal? I understood it might be next week.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I actually don't know the exact date, but I think it may be next week. No, sorry, I think it's been deferred for next week, but I can actually probably just check and come back to you later in the meeting.
Okay, I understand there's no further discussions between the proponents until that hearing's taken place. That's the latest information I have.
And can I ask, well, I mean, you met with them, and I suppose, can you tell us what happened between you and them? Is there?
Well, they were. All I can say is that I don't think there's any intention for the parties to get together again until that hearing's taken place at the tribunal. I think that's the next step.
Okay. And my second question was, I know when we had COVID happening, we were notified that the dog rangers had changed roles and helped out in other areas while they were there. I've had a regular feedback from people who are, the high use we've had on the tracks and trails and the beaches that there's a lot of unruly dogs out there, so I just want to question whether we've actually got the rangers back on the track and whether they're actually ready for spring to kick in and make sure we get a bit of law and order back in there.
Mr. Tui?
Follow the rules.
That'd be nice.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the Rangers are back resuming their normal duties, and yes, they are patrolling the tracks, and the intensification will start from the 1st of December when we start our summer period.
Thank you.
And the other thing to aid that thing from there, we're just purchasing another bicycle so that they can get around the tracks a lot more quickly.
You have a second question?
Oh, no, just, when are we due to review the dog policy? You said?
No. This, through you, Mr. Mayor, it's scheduled to commence the review probably early November. We're coming to a workshop next month.
No, this year.
Okay.
There'll be a workshop.
Thank you. Alderman Kendi?
Oh, beautiful segue. Thank you, Alderman Ewington. Not a fan of dogs, I know that. However, I'd just like to ask, sorry, Mr. Tweed, and again, with our future planning for dog parks in the city and any works that might be undertaken with them, are we actually making a provision to at least explore off-leash areas for greyhounds, given the huge number of greyhounds that are now being adopted by members of our city?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that'll be part of the workshop discussions. It just requires special recognition in relation to declaring an area for greyhounds.
Alderman Moll?
Mayor, I have two questions. The first one relates to scanned petitions. Given that section 48(1)(b) of the Evidence Act 2001 allows into evidence, and the following is a extract, so don't blame me for the language, thank the Parliamentary Council, allows into evidence a document that is a copy of a document and that has been produced by a device that reproduces the contents of documents, why does the General Manager not accept scanned paper petitions as compliant with Part 6 of the Local Government Act?
General Manager?
Thank you for the question, Alderman Mulder. The Local Government Act requires signatories to a paper petition to add their details to the paper petition and to sign the petition. The wording of the Act doesn't make any provision, unlike the Evidence Act, for copies of a petition to be accepted.
You have a second question, Alderman Moll?
I would probably challenge that, but that's another matter. My second question relates to, of course, the Kangaroo Bay Hospitality School. Once the buyback clause in the contract has been extinguished by substantial commencement, should that occur, are there any legal or contractual impediments to Shambroad abandoning the hotel project and submitting an alternative development application?
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. The answer to that question is no. There is no legal or contractual impediment that I'm aware of. The project basically it's the same situation for any developer. Once they've achieved substantial commencement, then if they cease construction, we have a very limited suite of actions that we can take, and there's a particular property that we all know and talk of regularly that fits that bill.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Chong, did you have any questions? That brings us to the end of the open session of Council. I'd like to thank members of the public that have followed us so far, but we do need to close the feed at this point.